Warning: tube amplifiers have lethal voltages inside them. Please do not attempt to build, test, or repair these without understanding and following all safety protocols. Hey y'all! This is round 2 of our heater wiring and grounding series. That's a wrap up for this Willsenton R8 amp. And we're going to do the second video on the grounding. And we're going to finish up the speaker jack wiring, the star ground point, pulling all of our grounds into a center point, and then I'm going to show you how I check the amp to make sure that it doesn't have this giant ground loop that I thought it had. It's got some smaller kind of mini loops, I'll call them, but thankfully it doesn't have the big one from the factory that I thought they might have made the mistake of making. So that's a good thing for you guys that aren't going to be doing this more extensive kind of wiring stuff, but I still feel like that this grounding rewire fixed several of the problems that I saw when I first tested this amp, especially using it with my tube phono stage. So if you've got weird hum ground picking up radio signals and having to use, $200 interconnect cables to get rid of them, it's the grounding in this amp that's the problem. It's not your other gear or your cables or whatever you got going on. And I think you'll find out if you do these mods, you'll have a much quieter amp that's got the noise floor down where it should be, and it's just a better sounding amplifier. So let's jump into finishing these mods. Okay, now that we got this buffed down, and this is where we're going to be putting our 3-terminal tag strip, I'm going to go ahead and tear out this ground wiring that I know we're not going to be using. And I think we want to totally redo this right here where they just got all the ground wires kind of clumped up here. Some of these are going to get moved over to a tag strip instead of having like 4 wires wound together and then tack soldered onto that terminal. So let's go ahead and come in here and unsolder this and pull these wires loose from each other. So we can see what we've got here and what they've got grounding where. One of these is the negative from the bridge rectifier, which got to figure out whether we're going to put that to the tag strip of the cap. We're probably going to just hook it to the star ground point and have that be our main ground, where this is going to come down to the tag strip. We're going to run 1 wire from the tag strip over to this cap. This is the ground wire that goes over to this other big cap. It's going to go to the star ground point. So that's going to go there. That's going to go to the tag strip. We're going to leave the positive alone. The positive's fine. One of these is the wire that goes to the bias board, and I'm fine with just, tagging it together off this cap as our convenient ground. But then we've got this other ground wire they've got going around the amp. And let me move this back so you can see where they've got this thing going. They've got this other ground wire that's going around underneath here, and it's coming over to one little stand here that's going to this bus bar. And I think I want to pull the ground off the center of this bus bar instead of at one end. Because you never want to pull the ground off one end of something like this. And they've got the RCA jacks and the volume control grounded here, or it seems to be they've got the volume control grounded here. There's a ground wire that's running over to the volume pot, which I'm good with that. So I think we're going to ditch this ground and run one from the center here to our tag strip. We're also going to run one from each of these buses to the tag strip as well. So let's get rid of this ground up here. And see what else we need to get rid of. Here's the negative of the output transformer that needs to go straight over to the speaker jack. So I'm going to pull it off this board for now. And then what do we have left? They've got this center terminal here that I think they were using as kind of another ground point for all of this mess. And so this is going to be pulled over to our tag strip. So I'm going to come in here and cut this one loose. And this guy, I think, is long enough where it can reach up here to our tag strip as well. So that's all good. And then what else is on this? Okay, we got the other output transformer where they had the output transformers hooked up to the chassis. I built quite a few amps. I've never seen anything grounded like this amp is. This is just crazy stuff. They may have put a... Nope, we got it out. There we go. There's that mess. We're done with that. So, we need to be able to run ground wires from these negative speaker jacks over to our two output transformer negatives. And then we'll run some smaller wires from here to the star ground point. Again, those are more of a safety ground for the output transformers in case for some reason the windings in the output transformer short out. It'll blow the fuse instead of putting, hundreds of volts on the speaker terminals. So we need to remove these two speaker jacks so we can safely solder new wires onto them. So you could probably solder it with it in here, but it's got a lot of plastic mounting hardware, and it's just a lot safer to do these with them not connected. So we'll go ahead and remove these speaker jacks. And then we'll be ready to do a little bench work and get this stuff prepped to put the star ground tag strip back in the amp and reinstall these speaker terminals and get them all connected up to the output transformers like they're supposed to be. Here we go. So let's get on the bench and get some of these tag strips made up, get the speaker wires soldered on, and get ready to start hooking this thing up correctly. Okay, so we have the negative speaker terminals put back in. We've got two wires hooked to each one, and I'm using some of the wire that was left over from pulling out the ground wire that was already in this amp. Got an 18 gauge and a 22 gauge. The 18 gauge is going to go to the output transformer. The 22 gauge is going to go to our tag strip. So we've got one for this channel that comes over here to go to this output transformer. Got another one over here that's running underneath this board that comes out right over here. Let's move this amp over a little bit. This guy right here is going to connect to that terminal right there. So let's first go ahead and tin these leads to get them ready to solder down here to this output transformer board. Get both of those ready to go. And come in here. This one's going to be a little trickier. So we got this board in our way. There's that one. And then this one over here is out in the open, so this will be an easy one to get my tip cleaned up. It's getting a little, got some flux goop on it. And now we have the output transformer leads going straight from the board to the jack with 18 gauge wire. Well, that makes me happy. So the next thing we did is we made up this little tag strip here, and it looks like that. We soldered a couple of pieces of 18 gauge wire across all three terminals to create a common ground that we're going to put right over here on this terminal. And we've got our screw. We'll go ahead and screw this guy down to the chassis here. And this is going to be our signal star ground point for the amplifier. All the grounds are going to come over here. So the first thing we have is we have the negative off the speaker jack, and it's also the ground for this little group of resistors here that also grounds one side of the heaters and just acts kind of a center ground point for all this stuff related to the voltage divider for the heaters. And so I'm going to pull this guy up. And solder him right there. Then the next thing we want to do is this terminal here, we're just going to have two wires on it this time. One wire is going to be going from here over to this bias board to act as the ground for it. And then the other wire is going to go from here to our tag strip. So let's go ahead and solder these two wires to this capacitor terminal. Okay, we've got that little ground over here, and then this wire is going to come up and go to our tag strip here. And I think I'm going to use the same terminal or the same hole to put the negative from the bridge rectifier to this tag strip as well. I want to leave enough room in here for all these other grounds we got to connect up. This is why I hate working with stranded wire. But I know some of you may be wanting to reuse the wire that was already in the amp. So there we go. Got a nice solid connection there. One of the other wires we have this guy right here that comes back to the other speaker jack. So we're going to run it up here. And I know some people like daisy chain these two together and then run them over. I like running a separate wire from each speaker negative up to the star ground point. And again, this is actually just a safety ground. The signal isn't going through this wire. This is only here to ensure that if the output transformer for some reason shorted out internally, that you can't end up with high voltage on the speaker jacks. It'll blow the fuse. Okay, so we've got that hooked up. I'm going to wait and solder that after we get some more grounds over here. So we have this ground wire here. It's coming over here for the ground of this other capacitor, and it needs to be, I'm actually going to run it underneath these other wires here just to keep things neat. And then when we're all done, we'll come back and zip tie all this stuff together similar to what it was originally. But as you can see, these bundles are like half the size they were before, because we've gotten rid of a lot of this redundant back and forth and around the world ground wiring we had. I think we'll hook this one up, have it come up and hook to right there on this side of that tag strip. Just like that. And again, I'm not gonna solder that one in place until I bring some of these other grounds over. And actually, there's not a whole lot left to ground. We got these two buses. We need to bring them over and ground them. I'll probably bring this one over and ground it here. Bring this one over and ground it here. And then we'll bring this center one from the front end of the amp right here, bring it down and across and hook it up right there in the center. And that should complete all of our grounds. So let me make up those wires and we'll get ready to wire that stuff up, and I need to pop another battery in the camera. Okay, so I want to come in here and make sure we don't have any ground loops left, and I was concerned when I saw there's a ground wire that comes from this point here, and I've got my ohm meter set to beep, and I've got this on the chassis ground. Got continuity there. Got continuity there. So we know we've got a ground here, and we've got this wire that runs over here to this board. And then we've got another ground that comes from this board up to the ground side of the insulated RCA jacks. And I was worried that they had a ground from here to here, and that this was also a ground going from the board to here, and then it was looping around the amp, and that this was grounded on the other end and going around in a circle. And that would be really bad. But the good news is they didn't do that. I go here, no ground. No ground. No connection there. So that's a good thing. And pulled this board up and looked, and it appears that this ground wire that's coming over here to this board is simply going to the negative side of this one filter cap, and they wanted to ground it to this part of the circuit, which is fine. So again, I was really concerned that there was a trace that ran across here to this ground point and then would go to here and be this big loop, and they didn't do that. So there's nothing to fix there. So what we're going to do now is we still need to ground these 2 points and this to here. And I'm going to use this center terminal here, and I realize that I don't have anything else to ground except these 3 points that I can hook to there. So I'm going to go ahead and solder these wires onto these 2 strips, and then install my wires from these 3 points to here, and we're done. So we come in with our clean soldering iron and Solder that on. Solder that on. So first we need to connect this wire. Come in and crimp this guy so it doesn't move around too much while we're trying to solder it. There's that end. And that's going to go from here to here. We got this other longer wire. It's going to go across from this one over to there. So let's crimp it in place. Solder it to this ground bus. Finally, we're going to run a wire from here over to here as well. And I think I'm going to go underneath there. Going to help hold that in place. Something like that. And solder this one in. And the nice thing about solid wire, even after you get it bent in place, you can come back and tweak it around and get it kind of where it looks nice and, you know, aesthetically looks nice, even though that's not going to have anything to do with the way it sounds. And it'll stay where you put it. And it'll help hold other things in place too. So we're going to have all three of these connect to this one tie point here. And the main thing we're doing is we're getting rid of that one connection that really bothered me, where they were grounding these two cathode ground buses through the heater wiring, which that's just crazy. I have no idea who thought that was a good idea. So when you're happy with the way they're laid out, come in here again with a nice clean tip, heat this guy up and solder these three wires to this center terminal here. Make sure you get it good and hot so the solder's flowing through the joint really well. And there we go. We got our freshly redone grounding scheme for the amp. So I'm going to come in here with some wire ties and kind of tie some of this stuff up and neaten up some of this wiring, bend it around where it looks nice, and then I'll be ready to go test this thing and see how everything sounds now. Well, I think you'll agree what we did in this episode really cleaned up the wiring in this amp. We got the output transformers wired up to the speaker jacks like they should be. We eliminated all of that sketchy headphone jack wiring. We got the grounding scheme headed towards best practices, and we also got the heater wiring the same, doing it the way it should have been done to start with. And so I really feel like that we're getting near the tail end of what we're going to be able to do with this amp. Got a few other little teeny things that I want to play with, and one of them is put it on the scope and play with the global negative feedback some, because I know there's some people that have been doing some mods with the global negative feedback. I think they probably went real overboard with what I've seen online, but we're going to put it on a scope and look at that and then see what doing some reasonable increases in the global negative feedback does for the sound and for the stability of the amp. And I think that's probably going to be the end of what I can do with this amp. The owner of it is like, where's my amp? Am I ever going to see it again? It's like, yeah, I've kept it over a month. So it's time to get this thing back to its owner. So anyway, I hope you're enjoying this series. I've had fun working on this amp. I have new respect for it, and I can understand why so many of you enjoy listening to this thing. For me, probably not my cup of tea. I don't need 45 watts of power. I'm fine with my little 8-watt single-ended amps and actually like the way they sound better than push-pull amps, at least right now. So, hey, everybody's got what they like and what they don't. You know, I'm sure this thing has a great place in a lot of y'all's systems. So, if you're enjoying this content and you want to see future stuff, we're going to be doing some cool builds here throughout this spring. Please sub to the channel. Click the little bell so you get notifications. Consider joining my Patreon to help fund these future projects or donate at my website. And until the next episode, have a great day.